What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Meg Bolger, and we speak about diversity and inclusion and what it really means. Stay tuned for a passionate and sometimes controversial discussion. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, lean back to be inspired. Hi, Meg.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Last time we recorded, the recording took 2.5 hours.
Yeah. I mean, so did the conversation. It wasn't just the recording.
I think the conversation was even longer.
Yep, it was.
Yes. So welcome back. And I usually start with a question, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And I'm aware that this question might trigger a different conversation this time than last time.
Okay, so should we start with that one again? I think I have the same answer, though.
Let's dive right into the conversation.
Sure.
We briefly, before hitting the record button, discussed what we could talk about. And diversity and inclusion was one topic, and our mindset towards our participants was the other topic, and somehow they're related.
Yeah.
So let's start with a harsh statement or provocative statement. Are we judging our participants?
I think that I call it the myth of neutrality in facilitation. Like the idea that you are supposed to be, going to be, or are neutral is like a myth, I think. And I think it's a dangerous one in that I think it's far more productive to deal with your biases, like at least personally deal with them, than it is to pretend that you're neutral. I used to teach people how to run gender and sexuality trainings, right? Like there was this 3-hour curriculum that we had, and we would spend 2 days doing train the trainers, where we would teach people how to run this 3-hour curriculum. And almost to a T, every single time we did that, people said, okay, so I know as a facilitator, I'm supposed to be neutral. And we would be like, no. And we would literally like jokingly like hold up the curriculum and be like, this is rainbow. Right? Like this is coming from a perspective. This has a pro LGBTQ lens. Like this doesn't believe that all viewpoints are equally valuable and equally desirable, right? Like this has a perspective. We want you to be pro LGBTQ, right? Like, and so, but that doesn't mean that a participant who comes in and disagrees with that conclusion, that says something ignorant, or even says something that like is, bigoted, that you shouldn't be able to receive that person as someone with the potential to learn something, right? Or the potential to change, or the potential to be like, if you say, this is a safe space, we want you to bring your questions, your comments, your concerns, your ideas, your beliefs into this space. This is what it's for. It's a learning environment. And then you don't have the ability to hold people who disagree with you in a generous way. Like that is a problem. And that is so much better to me than neutrality, because what people think they're aspiring to with neutrality is like, I'm not going to shut anyone down. And I'm like, that you don't have to be neutral in order to not do that.
I love that, because it just points at different perspectives on the term neutrality. Because I think as human beings, we cannot be neutral. And if we were neutral, nobody would hire us as facilitators. Because if you're 100% neutral and can be replaced by a machine, basically, then you're not guiding the group into a direction. You're not provoking them. You're not maybe speaking out the non-said. And still, I believe that a facilitator must be neutral in terms of the outcomes or the results of the conversation.
Yeah.
So for me, that's the neutrality that counts. So I don't want, if I have already a set mindset of where the conversation, where the group is supposed to go, then I wouldn't call this a facilitated process.
Sure. I mean, there's that language of like open to outcome, right? That I think is, like a cornerstone of a lot of facilitation is that like we're open to the outcome. I think that some people are brought in to be facilitators of an outcome, and you don't know how you're going to get the group there. Like, we know this is where we need to land. I need you to help me get the group there and like get their buy-in. And some people I think would say like, that's not facilitation, that's, something else. And I think other people would say, I'm making it easier for them to get there together and to move through a process. And like, that is okay. And I mean, like for me, with a lot of the social justice education that I did, I had a goal, like it wasn't maybe going to be accomplished that day, but like, I do want you to leave more open, or for like the gender and sexuality work, like I want you to leave more open, curious, interested, accepting of queer sexualities and non, straightforward and normative genders. And like, if that doesn't happen, like I'm facilitating you towards a specific end, but how you get there and whether you get there, what that means to get there today, like that's all really open.
And I would like to connect this back to the first question. So if you have a very specific outcome or transformation for your participants in mind, you want them to leave as open-minded, better educated, more tolerant, and maybe even activated to take action.
Sure.
What if they don't go there? So, and I think, and this is where it becomes interesting, how can you have this specific goal for the behavioral transformation or even mindset transformation for them to happen without judging them? And then for me, relates to the core facilitation skill of neutrality. I would say the lack of judgment, or at least, and then the question is, can we as humans stop judging our participants? And how do you deal with the fact that if someone doesn't leave the space with the new mindset that you aspired, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this. Okay, so I would say that the way you're using neutrality, I would replace with the word openness. Mm-hmm. That there is a level of openness that you need to have, and a level of like equanimity, perhaps. Like this is, I would say, like for me, like I don't know if this is true for every facilitator. I think some people could probably do this in entirely different ways that would really work. But for me, like there's a level of like steadiness that I need to have in order, I think, for people not to not feel judgment shuts down people's ability to be curious, right? I think it's very hard to be curious and judgmental at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I think that when people feel judged, they also move into a defensive stance, right? Yeah. And so as like a social justice facilitator, I am doing my best to avoid the need for you to defend yourself. Right? Because that's not going to get us anywhere unless I'm trying to like go into the defensive. Like I want to bring it up so we can look at it, like then I think it could be helpful. But most of the time it's actually just going to serve as a block to like, it's going to create like a barrier to where I want to go.
And
right?
it endangers the safe space that we are there to nurture.
I think that if the space is supposed to be about education, exploration, open-mindedness, then like defensiveness gets in the way of us being curious about what's going on, right? Mm. And so I want to not activate that in my participants as much as possible. Like I don't want you to feel like you have to defend yourself. Mm-hmm. Right. I actually want to like do something else with you, right? I want to go other places.
And I think what we want to do then with this, maybe even provocation, is to help them to wonder, maybe even question their own, or be curious about their own reflective process instead of defending and finding why they're reflecting on a certain topic the way they do. Become curious about their own process.
Yeah, I think that to me, like that's what you can facilitate that other people aren't going to do in other spaces, right? Is like, for me, there was a lot of times where all of us, no matter like what mindset we're coming in with, that we were in it and we didn't examine it or question it, right? And that what I wanted to do is inspire a curiosity or a potential like crack in your belief system, right? And then be like, hey, let's like shine some light in there and like see what's going on. And to me, that means like, I want you to be curious about this thing that you're bringing here, right? Yeah. Or I want to like reflect something that I'm seeing that maybe you haven't. But to me, like some of the thing that I'm asking you to do, be curious, be open, be like, like explorative of our ideas here. If I'm unwilling to do that for you, like, then it's like a hypocritical energy that I think really shuts down a lot of the curiosity. Absolutely. That you're wanting to inspire in other people. And if I can like respond to your question of like lack of judgment, I've read somewhere that like humans can't do negative commands, right? Like, don't think of a purple elephant. You have to go like, purple elephant, don't. Oh, okay. Like, like, or don't pet the dog. Your brain goes like, pet the dog, don't pet the dog, right? Like you have to do the positive command and then cancel it out. And so I don't think like there is, in like maybe like Buddhist tradition, like a lack of judgment, like there's that kind of just like, I'm just not going to have energy going into that system. I find that to be quite difficult. I think it's far easier to change the energy that you are applying than to suck the energy out of a system, rather than to like say, I used to be really judgmental and now I'm really curious. And that's what I would say is like, I don't think that people should stop judging their participants. I think it's incredibly difficult to stop something. I think it is far easier to shift from like, if you are judging your participants, I want to invite you into being curious, like deeply take that same level of energy and move it into a curiosity place instead of into a judgment place. It's not a lack of judgment. I think it is a positive orientation towards something else.
Because it also infects the way how we entered the room with judgment or with curiosity, infects the entire space and the behavior that happens within that. And I still wonder, we have such high expectations of our participants, right? In general, we want them to be open-minded and to be curious and to ask questions and to brainstorm, hence to be creative, to think out of the box, to be collaborative. There's so many attributes we're expecting the individuals to have. And what if they don't? I think being curious and open-minded, it's so difficult. Can we actually expect that from our participants? And how do we deal with it if they aren't?
It's a really good question about expectation of participants, because my initial thought is like, I hope that they come. Okay, so here's what I would say. Like, I try to let people know what they're walking into. And I've like talked about this a couple different ways when I'm teaching people how to facilitate, right? I'm like, okay, you walk into this room and all the chairs are in rows, all facing the front. What type of like experience do you think you're about to have, right? And they're like, I think we're about to do like a lecture. And I was like, cool. Now they're at tables, like facing each other. There's still like a front of the room, but like you're in like little pods. And they're like, yeah, okay, I'm like expecting to participate with each other, right? And that we're going to do some like little small group work at some point. And I was like, okay. And if they're in a circle and there's no tables in front of them, what feeling comes up on that? And they're like, oh, we're about to like get super vulnerable. And like, like I feel very exposed. And like, it's wild. If you put chairs in a circle versus chairs in a circle with desks in front of them, like the level of vulnerability is so different. Right. So to me as a facilitator, like, I have different expectations of participants in all of those settings. And I think it's important to forecast the type of thing that you're about to do with people. If people walk in being like, I am about to get a lecture, and then they see chairs in a circle, they're going to be like, oh, I was not prepared. I did not drink enough coffee for this, or I was not prepared for this morning. And to me, like, that's a mismatch of like expectation and reality. And what's tricky on Zoom is that type of forecasting doesn't exist. It looks the same every time, right? So in online spaces, like I'm often trying to communicate to my participants ahead of time, this is what you can expect from the experience, right? Like it's going to be participatory. There's going to be breakout groups. Like I'm going to have, we're going to do some self-reflection. And that's to communicate some of the explicit expectations that I have of them. Right. But I don't actually usually curate their mindset much more than expectations around participation. Like, I don't say like, come curious, come open. I usually say like, come ready to participate.
Come as you are.
That's going to happen. Right. I'm going to ask you to participate. And like, there's still some people will drop off the call. Some people will not really talk in their breakout rooms. Like those are ways that they still have agency in those moments. And then to me, like everything that you were describing, I was like, no, that's my expectation of me. Like my expectation is to far exceed where my participants are to make it easier for them to be here. Like I'm holding my hands up and most people are going to be listening to this. So like to me, if I want your curiosity to be at like if I want you to have some curiosity, like, and it's at a 3, like mine needs to be at a 7, or an 8. Like I have really high expectations of myself and the types of energy and the types of, like if I'm asking you to do something, I'm usually going to do it to a greater extent. Not in all cases, like in the sense that I think you can be like overly vulnerable with your participants. And then I think that's actually kind of dangerous because it makes them take care of you, like in a way that I think is really unhelpful. But most of the time with like curiosity, openness, like energy, I'm going to try to be higher than where I'm hoping you are. But to me, like, I don't have expectations of my participants being able to just do those things. To me, like as a facilitator, I have expectations that the structures that I have created, the environments that I am shaping will make it easy for you to do that. Will like create where that is the path of least resistance for you. But I don't actually think it's like, you just suck today and I did all I could. Like that can happen. But most of the time I find like, you're not setting me up for success. Like there's times where Meg goes into a session as a participant and I can come with like all the openness and energy in the world. But if the structures aren't set up for me to like succeed and they make me feel like uncomfortable or stunted or whatever, like to me, we have a lot of power as a facilitator to invite people to create a path of least resistance for people. And then they have to go down and they have to match us.
Thank you. I want to point out a few things. And one, I just want to articulate my awe of what just happened. So you were articulating with your hands and we're so aware that although we are recording this and we see each other's videos, you still had the podcast audience in mind and could in a split second catch yourself. Oh, I'm showing something that I'm not articulating, so I need to put some words into it so that those who only listen to us but don't see us can also follow. And I think this is just, it shows the mastery of facilitation and just underlines of what you mentioned is this awareness of how the participants are supposed to be and how you can make it easy for them to be themselves and to follow the structures, whatever you have designed for them. So thank you.
Yeah.
And the other thing that came to my mind was that I totally hear you. And I think that it's an art to really be able to have such high standards towards yourself and welcome the group and the participants where they are. And still, at least I hear very often complaints about the ideas are not good enough, or they have the cameras off, or they are difficult personalities. And this is what I had in mind with my question, all this judgment around participants that consciously or unconsciously, because at some point we fall in love with our designs. We put so much care into our workshops and we think that we have thought of everything. And then unthankful kids don't even see the beauty, don't even turn their cameras on.
I do think that's a huge problem. Like, I think that's a huge problem in the sense that we see them as the problem. And I think that that's like, if your workshop needs your participants to show up in a very specific, like how narrow a window do they have? Like if they don't show up ready to participate, open, curious, like, willing to listen to all these things, then the whole workshop isn't going to work. I'm like, like how flexible is your
setting
session?
them up for success. Yeah. And
what are how flexible, like if you need very specific things for your workshop to work, then I would say, that's great. Do it in a cohort where you can control that, right? Or do like I think it's a real problem when facilitators decide that the participants are the problem. Like if your workshop isn't working, then maybe you designed a workshop that doesn't meet the group, right? Where they are in the very literal sense of like, they're not willing to have their cameras on. What did you design around that? Okay. Like that's not them being a problem. That is your design not being appropriate for how the group is showing up. Like to me, it kind of like when I hear facilitators do that, to me, it feels like we're alleviating ourselves of responsibility. And we're just like, they sucked today. And I'm like, what did you do? All the things that you had the power to do in order to like match them, to like meet them there, because like if I'll ask a question of the people when I'm getting hired for online workshops, and I'll say like, what is the norm around cameras on or cameras off? And they're like, oh, they're a pretty like camera on group. I'm like, okay, great. And if they're not, then I can either say, I need us to communicate that that's an expectation ahead of time, or I can decide, okay, I have to be able to run this facilitation without their cameras on. And if I find that tricky, that's mine to figure out. That's not them to adjust to, right? So I think like, to me, there's there's sometimes we let ourselves off the hook and we just say like, it's because my participants sucked. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And like, you can't control them. You only can control you. Yeah. So what are rarely do I think, have we done all we can, right? Like, if you find it triggering that your participants have their cameras off, that's actually yours to deal with. That's not theirs to change, right? Or you didn't communicate this expectation ahead of time and they, showed up differently than you thought it was. It's not that you can't have difficult participants. I actually do think we have difficult participants, but I just think that like, when it's the entire design is reliant on a particular, like the group needs to show up like this or it doesn't work. And you don't communicate those expectations up ahead of time. Like to me, a lot of my sessions don't work if people don't participate. They just won't be 3-hour sessions. I can lecture them for like, if you don't want to participate, we're going to take a 3-hour session and I'm going to turn it into a 45-minute lecture. And then we're going to be kind of done. You know what I mean? And it's not going to be nearly as fun or interesting. So my sessions don't work if people don't participate. And so I communicate ahead of time. There's an expectation of participation. And then I make it as easy as possible for you to participate, right? Like it doesn't rely on participation in the large group the entire time, like that kind of thing. And I think if it did, that would be on me to change.
Thank you for clarifying that. I totally relate to that. And I must say that a brief from a client that says, usually the cameras are off. I'm like, oh, ready for the challenge. It's one of my favorites, to see how long it will take for them to turn the cameras on. And usually it's faster than expected.
Yeah.
And when I hear you speaking and all these design bits that we can do to really make sure that we get the engagement from the group, the engagement that we expect or hope for me, it sounds like, how can we make it inclusive? So how can we include all the types of possible participants to engage in the shape or form that they would like to? So, and inclusivity has been a buzzword over the past month or maybe year, and I think it's just the beginning. What does inclusivity mean to you, and where do we get it wrong?
Well, I think some of the struggles that I have with diversity and inclusion work, especially with those terminology, is that they just mean so many things. And I think when that is true, people can use it for so many different purposes. And then we just don't have any agreement. And there's also just like there's no teeth behind it. There's no specificity. And therefore there's no way to hold people accountable to it. There's no agreed upon definition. So like what you just said of like, it's more inclusive, right? I would say, yeah, it is. Like I think if you're designing for lots of different types of participation, then you're more likely to invite a wider range of voices into the room. When I hear the terms diversity and inclusion, I put quotes around that. Like I often think of historically marginalized groups, historically marginalized populations, identities, power dynamics, right? Like patriarchy, sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, right? Like those words also come to mind. And I don't think the word inclusion and like what we just described, I don't think that inherently is dealing with power dynamics, right? In that same way. I think it might, but it also might not. And a lot of, to me, like one of the things that I find really tricky about a lot of diversity and inclusion work is that I think some people are like, we need diversity and inclusion work so that we can address racism. And other people are like, well, we just need to be more inclusive in general, like, and I'm like, okay, those are really different goals, right? Like one is to like end structural oppression, or not even just structural, but just like it is to address like an oppressive system. And one is to like make it easier for somebody to say something in a group. And like, it's not that those can't be related, but do we see how just enormously different those goals are in a practical sense, and that we use the word inclusion to mean both? Like, to me, like that's a risky thing we do to make it that broad, right? Of like, I want to run a more inclusive session. And I'm like, use a different, like at this point, I would say, use a different word to tell me what you want to do. I want the introverts to speak. Perfect. I want to make sure that the women in my session feel just as valued for their opinions as the men in my session. Great. I want to make sure that people of color know that their voices like really matter and that I'm not going to allow them to just be like shouted down because they're the minority in the room. Perfect. Right. I want to make sure that people who are neurotypical and neuroatypical have access to all of my information. Great. Those are all things that people could mean by saying inclusive. And I don't think that it's likely that one person, when they're saying, I want my session to be more inclusive, is saying all of those things.
And I wonder, so thank you for describing the complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And still wonder whether it could be, at least when we have not the goal of creating more inclusive societies in the first step, but maybe more inclusive ways of communication or sessions, whether it cannot be a design challenge, whether it's a design challenge that could cover all of the above. Isn't it the way how we invite groups in, how we design for small group versus large group conversations, how we brief the individuals and participants before they are leaving into a breakout room to make sure that everyone there gets to speak independent of their gender, their color, their age, their status, or abilities.
So I'll just give you, I would say part of me wants to say yes. And part of me thinks that just the term diversity inclusion is used so broadly that I think there are times where like you actually don't want an inclusive session. You want something else. And but you're putting it under that umbrella. So let me see if I can come up with an example really briefly. There are people I know who do diversity and inclusion work, right? And if I said, like, what is your goal in this session? They would say, for example, they might say, I want the people of color in the room to feel like they get to speak their truth and they get to speak like truth to power and share their stories. And I really want the white people that they work with to like understand what it is like for them to work in this environment, right? And I think a lot of people would hear that and go, yeah, that sounds like a DEI workshop. That might be optimizing for particular people's voices, particular stories, and actually shutting down other people and saying, you don't get to talk, right? And you might even say like, okay, we're actually going to run a diversity inclusion session. This is only for people of color, right? To be able to share that like space ahead of time so that when they come together when we all come together as a large group, those people know like each other's stories already. They already have each other's backs. They're able to like, be supportive in this particular way. That first session, specifically exclusive, right? Like you are not welcome here. And it is for what people would call inclusive reasons, right? Like it is for like a DEI reason that we are creating exclusive spaces. Or we might even say like, we're actually going to do an experiment in this like 10 minutes. All the men in the room, you are not allowed to talk for the next 10 minutes. You are only allowed to listen. Is that an inclusive practice? No, but it is for a goal, right? That we put under this word inclusion. And then I think it confuses the shit out of people. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but like it really confuses people because then you have people who go, I thought this was about inclusion. Why are you telling me I can't speak? I thought this was about inclusion. Why are you telling me I can't go to this session? I thought this was about inclusion. Why are you prioritizing blank, blank, blank? And this is where I think we like really trip ourselves up is that like we have said inclusion is the goal. And then there are so many both like means and ways we get there that are specifically exclusive, like exclusionary practices that are like supportive of that goal, but also like, I'm not sure if that's what we mean all the time, like versus a more equitable society, a more like dignified society. Like, I'm not sure if inclusion is always the goal. And yet we use that language for it. And I think we've pigeonholed ourselves into fighting things that I don't think are worth. I think that term is so big and so broad and so non-specific that it's confusing to the average person. And that a lot of times we actually are trying to create exclusive spaces, men's groups, gay bars, like all like there's those spaces exist, and to
for a specific reason, for good reason. We and like to hang out.
They're not inclusion. Yeah. They're not inclusive,
and
and that's okay.
Yes, and I love how with every topic we just decompose the complexity, and I wonder whether two things come to my mind. One is a similar conversation that we had in public around discrimination and the value of positive discrimination. So in Germany, there was a huge debate and laws of women quota. In South Africa, there was affirmative action to get more people of color into management positions. So does positive discrimination is possible in order to reduce discrimination? And I think the same question could then come up. Is it okay to exclude in order to drive inclusivity? Yeah. And then a related question to that, is it actually a goal to be 100% inclusive? Because if we include everyone, don't we lose maybe also the purpose and the focus?
Yeah,
and whom are we excluding if we try to include everyone?
These are the questions that I'm not sure are worth. To me, we have created these questions by using a particular type of language to assert our goals. And to me, like that language is not, at this point, is not descriptive enough that I feel motivated by it, that I feel like it drives me or pulls me in the right directions. And instead, it leads us into like questions like this, where I'm just not sure they're worth getting into in the sense that like, if I was just like, let's just take the word inclusion, like, I think this would be a worthy experiment. Like, let's just take the word inclusion out and like, now tell me what our goal is.
Interesting. I had a similar chain of thought with, what if we only focus diversity? So if the goal is to get different perspectives to be heard, to be included in a decision-making process, in a design process, in a development process, then the real goal is to empower different perspectives. And that's where the diversity comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And then does it really have to be such a loaded word like inclusion? Or is it...
I could probably do the same on diversity, but that's just me.
Does it then boil down to accessibility?
So I don't know if this is relevant, but I think it's what comes to mind. I'm reading a book right now about an organizer in the American South so there's a particular part of the American South that has been like just incredibly poor. Like the people of that region of Appalachia have just been historically incredibly poor folks. And yet the natural resources of that region are huge, like coal mines and, like there's just incredible like natural resources. And so those people have been exploited for like hundreds of years and had the wealth taken out of their region while remaining poor. And the organizer of this book, or the subject of the book and this organizer, like one of the things that he believes is like that the people need to be empowered to know that like they have the power to change their own lives and they have the power to organize with each other and to like be resourced with each other and to solve their own problems. And so like all of that, he's like such a facilitator in that way of just like, I'm going to bring these people together. I'm going to help them talk. I'm going to help them realize that they can like do this and that they can organize together. And then they are going to solve their problems. Right. To me, the idea of people being alleviated from the suffering of poverty is like something that I think a lot of like diversity and inclusion work, like I think a lot of people would be like, yeah, like we want, we don't want people to be as poor. We don't want people to be suffering unnecessarily. We want people to have access to healthcare. We want all these things. I would have put that under this like realm of social justice, right? And to me, racism, classism, sexism, exploitation, all of that is like wrapped up to me in social justice. And then like some of it got brought over to DEI. Like some of like, like people would be like racism, like definitely a DEI issue, right? Or like sexism, definitely a DEI issue. Classism, like, well, that's a little different. It doesn't, I think, pull over as quickly for people, probably because a lot of DEI comes in the corporate world, which has just no relationship to like, it has a ton of relationship to poverty and to exploitation, but not to, we can't solve it the same way because that would actually undermine the like very structures that are hiring us to come in. Right. Anyway, I brought all this up to say like that population of people is not diverse. Like, I mean, it's more diverse than you think it is. Right. But like, they're like in the sense that it's not all white. It's not all one gender. But like that has no relationship to what we think of as diversity. And I don't think that the people, in that space organizing themselves need to be diverse. Like, and they just need to be the people, right, who are suffering and have the problems. They need to be the right people that are doing it and not necessarily like the NGOs and the nonprofits that come from all over the country to try to solve these people's problems. Those companies could be, or organizations could be incredibly diverse. And I don't think it would be more appropriate for like
a very local issue.
Yeah. And so like, again, like, I think it's become this abstraction. I don't know if that example was helpful at all. I don't think it was, but like, it's become this abstraction of like, we need diversity for diversity's sake. And I'm like, no, like we needed to recognize that we had a system that only allowed men to take, ownership and responsibility and power for like many, 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 many generations. And we would like to correct that imbalance now, right? Or like we see the need to correct that imbalance. And so it's going to look like we're getting more diversity where we're just kind of like trying to correct this imbalance. And there are these like structures and systems we might need to do that. But to me, like, I don't know, to me, like diversity also can feel very hollow. Like, and it can feel, and my problem this is the part, Miriam, where I'm just like, I don't know if any of this is helpful for your podcast, but like, to me, like, I really care about alleviating the suffering of like the structural oppressions that exist. And I think there's some ways that diversity has absolutely nothing to do with that. And I believe that you can have you can have a lot of like diversity and inclusion goals that don't share any of the politics that feel like they get assumed by certain people when they're describing diversity and inclusion goals, right? And I think that's really dangerous that like somebody could be like, like there's just incredible inequity that is pervasive. And yet there's a lot of goals that we have that are about correcting this like surface level inequity.
And we have to start somewhere. And so if I'm thinking, if we started at school levels, we can have schools for boys, schools for girls, schools for people of color, schools for people from certain social class. We can have all these, right? And if from a very young age, there's no diversity in the upbringing, then we'll have very different outcomes in when these people grow up, right? So the earlier we start to bring diversity into the spaces, the less likely we are to end up with stubborn, ignorant, confrontational, intolerant adults. So yes, I think it might be a buzzword that is overused at the moment. Oh, we can solve world problems with DEI. Maybe not. And maybe the very first step is actually to apply more of what we consider basic facilitation skills of inclusivity, of bringing people together, of flattening the room, of listening to all voices, of being open-minded, that this might actually have more impact than putting the label on every door and pretending that it's a big topic and bringing diversity into conversations that maybe don't need more diversity.
I think to me, what I would just say is that I would love, like on a very practical level, I would love us to, anytime somebody says diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would love them to describe what they're talking about without using any of those words, because I think that they will get much more specific and much more usable if we start doing that. If they said like, I think we need to have more diversity in this space. If I was like, okay, can you say that again, but don't use the word diversity? I think people would probably go, I'd like to see more women and people of color here. Great. Like, cool. Perfect. We can now like decide what that means, decide what is more, figure out how to do it, right? But I think if they say, I want more diversity, somebody could very earnestly say, you're right, we don't have enough conservatives. We need more diversity of thought. And people do this. And I think there's a lot of spaces I'm in where people go, oh. And I'm like, that is diversity. Everyone here voted for the exact same person, in the last national election. So like, that's a fair critique. And they're like, no, it's not. And I'm like, no, because when you said diversity, you meant women and people of color. When they said diversity, they meant political orientation. And neither of you said the second part, which is, what do you mean by diversity, right? And to what end do we hope that will accomplish, right? Because somebody could say, well, most of our clients, like 50% of our clients are women. And yet everybody here making this decision about this is not. So I think that's bad, like, cool, perfect, or like, there's so much more useful information that can happen when we start being more specific, and we can stop having an argument about whether diversity is for this or this. Instead, we can say, I don't agree. I don't think we need more political diversity, or I don't think we need more diversity of thought. I think we need more diversity of experience and identity. And we can have that debate instead of having a debate about, do we need more, quote, diversity, So that would be those words are too big and broad to be effective at this point, or to even communicate what you mean.
Thank you. I love the passion. And I love the exercise to, okay, what do you mean? Explain without using the words. I think that's really magic. And while listening to you, I was wondering whether it's so easy to hide behind the buzzwords in order to exactly avoid that, because suddenly you have to take a stance. So do you want more women? And what does it mean? Because suddenly you become accountable for your actions. So I think if in a DEI workshop, and I think there are many of those these days, you would actually break that down and say, okay, what does it really mean? Then very quickly you're in a action designing stage that feels very scary to most.
Yes. And this is why like I'm passionate about this because I spent many years, I think, having conversations that weren't worth having, helping people define what we meant by diversity and inclusion. Like those are exercises I have done and run. And you know what? I don't think they did anything to move any of it forward in a way that the same sentence of just like, I mean, so what's funny about that sentence I said of like, say it again, but use different words. That is a thing I use in facilitations now. Anytime anytime people are using buzzwords, because I think it is so, buzzwords create such incredible stories in our heads, right? And they communicate, to me, a lot of people, like they communicate entire viewpoints and opinions about you, right? Just by using particular words, right? If you said fake news a few years ago, then I knew exactly what I was like, I know what kind of political environment you're in. I know the type of news you watch. I know who you voted for. And I've got all these, and I know how to dismiss you as somebody I'm not going to bother with, right? Like just from the word fake news. And so to me, versus if I was like, say that again, but don't use that term. And they were like, I have a real distrust in the media. I could be like, yeah, me too. Like, absolutely. Tell me about yours. Right. Or like, tell me what you mean and why, how that affects your life. Like that's a strategy that I use to stay open to people is say that again, but use different words. But I also think in this particular case with diversity and inclusion, like we do avoid a lot of hard work of the next steps by getting stuck in the language and the like big picture thinking, because we don't know what the next step is. Yeah. And we don't all agree about what it means to do it. And we can stay avoidant by just staying at the high level intellectual jargon of it all.
And it almost sounds as if the buzzword create an illusion of agreement.
Or a deep illusion of disagreement.
Yeah, so if we use...
It's polarization. The buzzwords create a lot of polarization.
It's easy to say, yes, I agree.
Yep, totally.
We want more transparency. Yes. Okay, so we'll disclose your monthly salary. Oh, no. It's not that kind of transparency that I voted for.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, buzzwords also, that's what I got from your fake news example, create the illusion of in-group, or it's a lingo through which you can differentiate yourself or find your tribe.
Yes. And that is actually what a lot of us are doing by using particular language. Like if I want to cue to you that I'm a particular type of person, I can use certain types of, I can use certain words to communicate that.
Or acronyms, which are highly exclusive.
Totally.
So by using lingo and by using acronyms, we're excluding those who don't understand, who don't know, who haven't been educated, or who are not part of the in-group.
But I think, and I absolutely, they're exclusive. But I think, I guess the point I wanted to make is that a lot of times we're like, in some like DEI conversations that I have been in, or in some of those environments that I have been in, people are like, well, I was like fighting with this person, like I was disagreeing with them. I was trying to challenge them. I was trying to educate them. And I'm like, no, you weren't. You were trying to cue to your crew of people that you are one of them. And you were trying to show that you're one of the good ones, right? Like, and so there's this rule called the Iron Law of Institutions. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
So the Iron Law of Institutions says that we are likely to make, I think it's around, I know very little about this. So if somebody knows more, apologies, please correct me. So what I was introduced to it by is basically that you are going to make choices that actually indicate to people that you're a good person within your group more than advancing your group's cause. So like if, say within the Democratic Party, one of the goals is to, which I don't know if it is really, but like is to get Medicaid for all, right? Medicare for all, to pass that type of legislation. That somebody in the iron law of institutions, rather than making like moves that would advance that cause, you will make a move that will actually just make you be seen within the Democratic Party as like a really good Democrat, but that doesn't advance the cause. And that like to go against the iron law of institution would be to be willing to advance your cause, even if it makes you less popular within your group. Right. And that most people won't.
Yeah.
Like most people don't. They want to be seen within the people that they care about being judged positively by. They want to make moves that are that, right? So in my example of like two participants having an argument, I'm like, you're not trying to change that person's mind, because if you were, you would be listening to them. You'd be looking for points of agreement. You'd be open. You wouldn't be shouting. You wouldn't be using buzzwords, because none of those things work, right? But what you're doing a great job of is half this room thinks you're the shit now. You know, like half this room is like, yeah, Meg knows what's up. Meg's coming with all of the like, you know, like with all of the big hitters and like coming with all the ideas, but it's not going to change anything. Right. And my group's going to know I'm one of them.
Yeah.
And we make choices like that all the time. And it is exclusive, and it's to show I'm part of this group.
Yeah.
And when we let go of the jargon, and when we, I think, actually extend ourselves towards people and say, like, tell me why you believe that. I want to know. Like, that curiosity actually can make other people less trusting of us, but can make a much bigger difference.
Yeah. Reminds me of the Adam Grant's book, Think Again. It's amazing how to change people's minds, actually, really. And your example is spot on. And I wonder what this actually means in our daily work of facilitating group conversations. So how often are we actually getting trapped in these kind of conversations where it's only about looking good and being liked and feeling liked? And I think I wouldn't judge that need. I think it's a instinctive human behavior, because a sense of belonging and being accepted by our tribe is just a survival need. So I think instinctively we all do that, and we do have the choice. So we don't have to do that once we're conscious.
I think that, to me, one of my like probably larger growth points as a facilitator, and ideally, this isn't to say I'm over it, is that like being liked by the group was really, really, really important to me. And I made a lot of choices at the beginning of my facilitation like journey where I would make it so that these people would know I'm on their team. Right. And to me, like, that is like to circle back to that like idea of neutrality, like that I think is a really dangerous type of move, is when you're like, I'm not going to do this for the good of the group. I'm not doing this for the good of the group. I'm not doing this so that I can advance the, you know, explicit outcomes and goals. I'm doing this because I want these people to know I'm one of them. And I want that, even like, I want that person to like me. You know, like I've absolutely made choices where I was like, I'm doing this so that one person goes, yeah. And that I think is a really like human thing, but I think it's a really dangerous thing as a facilitator to be that level of like, in this case, like bias, and willing to not hold back from that and decide I'm here for the good of the group. I mean, that's one of my beliefs as a facilitator, is like, I'm here for the good of the group. And that means like, I'm not going to abandon any of my participants, and like, if they like, sometimes it feels like your participants like chuck themselves overboard. Like they say something and you're just like, that was so out of left field. And it's like, we're all on this boat and we were going on this journey, and then they just jumped out overboard. And you're like, what? And everyone's like, that was garbage. Can we leave him behind? You know, like, can we keep going? And to me, like, as a facilitator, there have been times where I'm like, yeah, he's done, you know, and it's not a like, he needs to be removed from the space. It's not that kind of thing, but it's more that like, I can just let him go out to sea and let everybody judge him and be like, you're on your own, man. You jumped overboard and I am not saving you. Right. And I think for me as a facilitator, that's a really dangerous choice, because then everyone knows, oh my God, if I jump overboard, Meg's also not going to save me, and we all get a little more nervous about the like safety raft and whether it's going to come get us. So
beautiful example.
Yeah.
Because it also, it's what is this? Why are you doing this job? And then again, the inclusivity, even if it hurts, including the voices that hurt.
Yeah. I think that this is a really like philosophical belief of mine, and it is that I want to, in my spaces, I would like to create a world a very particular world and a very particular experience of the world when you're in my spaces. And one of those is that you are not going to be abandoned. Like, you are not going to be abandoned. There's nothing that you can say that won't make me extend towards you. Now, there might be times where you're going to say something where I'm like, I can't, like, it's very, very rare, but like, it's possible that someone could come in with just so much vitriol that I might be like, I tried, we can't, bye-bye, right? Like, it's not to say that I don't have boundaries, but like beyond the extreme cases where I'm like, this is absolutely vitriolic hatred that just can't be present in this space. Other than those extreme cases, I'm going to go get you. Like, I'm gonna be like, ugh, even if I have to be like, I don't want to do this, but whatever. I'm gonna jump over the side of the boat and swim out and come back and get you. And like, you're not gonna just be thrown out to sea. And that's what's unique about that space, is like, you can say something and I will not go, you are on your own. I am not going to drive the bus over you. I am not going to versus like, I'm going to go out there. It doesn't mean I agree with what you said, but I'm not going to let you be attacked, and I'm not going to let you be left behind.
And I totally see the beauty in it. And I see the urgency or the meaning because of what you mentioned, the signal it sends to the remaining group. So if you leave one behind, then parts of the safe space is gone. It's like talking to children. You can only come back to the table if you behave. So only if you're a kind of nice person. Otherwise, you're not belonging here. And this is not the space that we want to create. On the other hand, and I don't have the answer, and I'm just curious, where's the balance between endangering the dynamics of the entire group?
Yeah.
And because yes, it's okay to slow down the entire group to make sure that everyone is on board and has a place in the ship.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if you don't want the full ship to fall over just because the skipper is busy swimming after the one person and then basically leaves the ship behind. Yeah. So how do you balance that?
So the way I would say, I have two answers. One is the amount of time and control that you give to the person who jumped overboard, right? Like, if I think there is an amount of time and energy and attention where I think it's totally appropriate and be like, I'm coming to get you, you're coming back on board, then we are moving on, right? But like, you can't give them the anchor to the ship, And like, you can't give them the power to steer the boat. Those are two really like important things. And I think there's a couple of things. So one answer of mine is like an order of operations that like, I'm going to get you back on, but then we're going to do something else, right? Mm-hmm. Like we're going to keep going. We're going to keep moving, but you get to be like wet and drippy over there. Right. But you're here and you're back and we can move on now. So I have to attend to you first, and then I can move on. And I think the only reason that people trust me when I do that is because I don't let go of the power. Like, there's a difference between physically there is a real difference. And I've done this where like, I'm handing you the mic versus I'm holding the mic out to you. Yeah. Right. And I'm like, okay, I'm willing to listen. Here, you talking to the mic. Right. But I'm holding it. And at any point I could be like, ooh, you are done. You are done now. Right. Like, and that I think is a really important power dynamic to maintain, is that like that person doesn't get to become the captain. Yeah. And that's when we don't trust that's when I think like the whole ship becomes in danger, is when they are given too much power to control it, and that you haven't maintained your center and your ability to like steer what's happening.
Yes. Awesome example, once again. And what I hear is it also depends with what intention the person jumps off the boat. Is it a power game to distract you and to sabotage or boycott the session?
Yep.
Just for the pleasure of it. And there are people like that.
There are people
who just find the joy in sabotaging. Or is it really someone who has such a different belief or is shaken by the content that then there is a potential opportunity in getting this person back, because you need this, it's air quotes, negative energy, or it's conflictual energy that can be used for something productive.
Yeah.
And it's not destructive per se. And I think that's the difference.
That's such a good point. I think that's such a good point. And to me, like, it's really, so if somebody was like, how can you tell the difference? Right. To me, it would be that, like, if I extend generosity, like a generous story towards them and assume they're not trying to capsize the boat, right? Like, I need to go in with that assumption. And then I think when you go in with that assumption, their next action, I think, is probably going to tell you where it's coming from more distinctly. I think it's dangerous when we're like, oh my God, every person who jumps over the side is trying to capsize the boat. And it's like, no, that's not inherently true, right? Yeah. Like, there's very specific, like, I have had many examples of a participant who was like, well, like said something that was dismissive or argumentative or, just like really different than the vibe everybody else was on. And if I had just dismissed them, I think it would have been, if my first move to them would have been like, you are just trying to derail stuff, right? Like, and that's where I think some people are like, what do you do with the devil's advocates? I'm like, well, don't relate to them as devil's advocates. Like, that can't be your, like, if that's your first story about that person, it's really going to shape how you interact with them. And I think for me, I need to be able to make an initial story that is generous of that person. Like, there's a workshop that I ran recently that's about this, where I have people, there's this theory of needs. Glasser's choice theory has 5 core needs that every human has. And one of their security, freedom and fun, love and belonging, power and recognition. I should have done them in order. Anyway, so there's these 5 core needs. But one of the beliefs in this system is that we are going to get these needs met in healthy or in unhealthy ways. Right. And so I tell the story about a participant, and then I say, okay, look at this person through the lens of needs. Like, tell me what that story is, right? Like, tell me how would you justify, understand, relate to his behavior, right? Through this lens of needs. And everyone can do it. They're like, he was looking for security in this way. He was looking for love and belonging in this way. He was looking for power and recognition in this way, right? And I was like, cool. And then I give this model of ignorant, stupid, evil. And that's how we relate to people who, when we think we're right and we think they're wrong, we go through these series of assumptions: ignorant, stupid, evil. It's from a TED Talk by Catherine Schultz. And I think especially around politics, especially around DEI stuff, like ignorant, stupid, evil, super powerful pattern, right? And then I say, okay, now look at this guy through ignorant, stupid, evil. Now tell me the stories that you're making about him. Now tell me, how do you justify his behavior? How do you understand what? And people talked about how different they saw him when they saw him through those mindsets, right? They were like, if I look for needs, super humanizing him. Like, he's a person in a situation, right? Yeah. And I was able to come up with a ton of needs that he wasn't getting met and that he was trying to get met in these unhealthy ways. And I had a lot of compassion for him. And I was able to just be like, hey, yeah. and it totally made sense. Like, in this story, it totally made sense, like how you extended towards him and how you met him and why you were able to do that. And then when we went from the ignorant, stupid, evil framework, they were like, oh, like, he became this like archetype of just this like shitty person, who's like a particular type of participant, who's this ignorant, stupid white man who's coming in and saying all this ignorant biased stuff. And I it felt like he was attacking me, and it was so personal, and I just had no time or energy for him.
Yeah.
Same dude, same story, totally different mindsets.
Yes. What I recognize is with the ignorant, stupid, evil lens, we make it about us. Mm-hmm. And most of the times we consider someone ignorant, stupid, or evil when we feel triggered or attacked by their behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if we use the lens of the basic needs, we make it about them.
And we remember that they're like, the thing is, what's amazing is that you don't have to know their intentions. Mm. You can actually, to me, like this story that I tell, like, I think the fact that I related to him as a person in that moment and decided to throw him a life raft and bring him back on board, like actually changed everything, because he was totally ready for me to dismiss him. Right. He was actually like, I think, looking for a fight. Like, I think that there was a way in which he was like, you people, and was so ready for me to come back with like, well, you people, and because I didn't, he was like, what? And I was like, grab the dinghy.
And the beauty is that you might have done some deep healing inner child work where something triggered this poor person of feeling dismissed as a child all day long and was kicked out of the house and was just seeking the same kind of known sensation. And there you went to rescue him and bring him on board and giving him a sense of belonging. And this might have some, deep impact.
And I think what's, to me, like, if my story changes my moves towards him, and then he doesn't meet me there, he's still trying to bring down the ship, that's when you decide, for the good of the group, I need to let you go.
Yeah.
Right? Or for the good of the group, I'm not going to let you participate anymore. Or, you know what? I gave you some time to talk. You are continuing to take up a lot of space, and this has become about you instead of about us and what's potential for us to do together. And I'm going to go ahead and like cut this off. Right? I think all of those are totally worthy choices to make, but I think sometimes we feel like we have to make that choice first before we do any of the connection stuff. Like, I have to cut this person off because they're saying really harmful things. And I'm like, I wonder if you can extend to them first, see if they will actually, like kind of redirect or correct themselves. And then you can decide to move on.
Yeah. So what is the driver of our actions and our decisions? Is it our assumption of a specific behavior or driver, or are these the facts that we can actually see?
Sure. I think that's in the nonviolent communication like world, the like, I'm just stating a bunch of facts and I'm not making judgments about them. Yeah. I think that's a really beautiful thing. I think I find that really difficult. And so I actually create generous stories rather than ungenerous ones. I don't create neutral stories. I'm not good at the, like, here's a bunch of facts. Like, I'm actually, I think, less good at that as I am at being like, what would be the most generous story I could make about this person and their actions? And if I can come up with that, then I can be like, okay, if that was happening, what would you do?
And wonderful, because you're aware of what kind of person you are. And hence you're creating a nudge for yourself or a system for yourself that helps you to deal with the situation that might be challenging for you.
Yeah. People think I'm very unjudgmental because I'm able to be quite generous with people, but I actually think it's because I'm incredibly judgmental, and I have just retrained that muscle to continuously activate a curiosity or a generosity thing. Yeah. Like, that's the thing. Like, I have a lot of judgment energy. I just have shifted it slowly over into like, make generous stories of people, because I make a ton of stories of people.
Yes. And at the end of the day, I think the more judgmental we are towards others, the more judgmental we're actually towards ourselves.
Oh, yeah, that's my number one target.
It's just us projecting on, I mean, it's the same for all of us, right? We're just projecting on others all the stuff that we're dealing with between our ears. And then as facilitators, we are finding ways on how do we channel that.
It's so funny. I don't know why this really just striking me with you saying that, but like, I have trained myself to make incredibly generous stories of other people. And this is something that like I do. I think I started in facilitation stuff of like, I need to be able to justify their behavior in a way that allows me to make a generous move towards them, because those are the moves that are, to me, like those are the moves. Those are the only breakthroughs I've ever had. Like maybe some around boundaries where I'll just cut someone off and people will be like, wow, I didn't know you could just decide that was enough, and that can be helpful too. But even that is like to me, like it's still like a generous, it can still come from a really generous place. Yeah. And I'm just struck by you saying that, like when we're really judgmental of others, we're incredibly judgmental of ourselves. And I was like, I don't think I've turned that around. I don't think I've turned that power that I have done so much for other people of like creating generous stories of my participants, of people in the world. I don't think I've turned that around on myself and decided like, instead of judging yourself, you are going to create incredibly generous stories of all of your actions.
Maybe that's
a good call to action there. It's a good call to action. Yeah. Yeah. So I do think you said, you asked a question a while ago of what about if they don't leave the space changed? And, or you don't see the change that you wanted to inspire in someone, like, what do we do? And to like put another image that I think is really important into the world, like, and I hear this language, people say it a lot, but I don't think we take the wisdom of it, which is planting a seed. Like, I think that what we do a lot is plant seeds, or I think that's a really, really great thing to consider, that like, when you take some sort of action, like when you put out an idea or are challenging somebody's beliefs, that you're planting a seed and that you don't usually get to see it sprout. Like that would be incredibly fast growth, and that you're watering or that like maybe those seeds are already there and you're just watering it a little bit. Right. And to me, the generosity part is like the softening of the ground. That like you might like if you just like just dump a bunch of seeds out, like like they just sit on top of the ground and they haven't been like you haven't softened the ground for them to be in. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happens when you extend towards people and you create generous stories of them and you like say like that makes sense that you believe that, even if I fundamentally disagree with it. Like you are that defensiveness, like to bring us like full circle, like that defensiveness of like that barrier or that protectiveness, right, is to me like that hard ground. And when I can say like, that makes sense, even if I disagree with you, or that sounds painful, or, I think if I had your life experience, I would believe that too. All of those to me are like softening the ground techniques. And then I'm going to plant a seed. I'm going to be like, but here's why I think differently, or like, here's something you're not seeing, or that feeling is exactly what we're talking about. And why a lot of people think that diversity is so important is because of this exact thing that you're pointing out, whatever it is. That's the seed, right? Yeah. And then maybe I can water it a couple other times in the session. Like maybe there's going to be other times where they're like, oh, interesting, right? But so rarely am I going to get to see that sprouted. Sometimes it's a miracle when it happens. When people change in front of us, I think we should consider that a small miracle, because that is so tremendously difficult to do. Like to take in feedback that challenges something or information that challenges something in you, to let go of your old story and to create a new one in front of people, not just one person, a group of people, is such a vulnerable act. And when it happens, I think it is a tiny miracle, and which totally works for me. And I've seen it, and it can happen, right? We do sometimes are like, oh my God, the thing sprouted, amazing, right? But I think we should like assure and understand in ourselves that like, just because it doesn't change in front of us doesn't mean that's not growing, and doesn't mean we didn't plant the seed. And I think that in a lot of my work, I see people wanting people so desperately to change their ideas right then and there. And I sometimes joke that that is when we are planting trees on people. Like we're just like, wham. And like, to me, when you replant something that already has grown, it doesn't take as well. It like is very unstable because it hasn't rooted itself in that place, right? It's not their belief, it's your belief that you're trying to like transpose onto them. And so like, I think it's a very understandable want. And I think it is something that I have in me for sure. You know, the more personal and important something is to me, the more I want you to believe what I believe. Right. And the more tempting it is to try to give you my thing whole hog, right? And just be like, here is the whole thing. You don't have to grow the tree. You just go ahead and take that tree and then we can be good, you know, but it's not theirs. It won't have the staying power. And when somebody challenges it, it's really easy for it to flop over versus if they grew it from a little seedling, like it will be their belief. And I think that that is something that like, yeah, for me, allows me to be guided that like, I don't need to see you change to believe that I'm making an impact. And to like really go with this metaphor as far as I can go, I can actually flood the system and make it so that you can't grow it. Like you can overwater something and kill the potential, right? Yes. And to me, like that's when we're trying to force it to grow. And that's not how things work. You can't water them more into growing faster, right? So I think as a facilitator, like that is something that I've learned is like, maybe I'm going to get to see you change, maybe not. But if I don't get to see you change, like have I softened the ground, planted the seeds, ideally maybe even given you some access to future water sources, but like, have I not destroyed the potential of that growth? Because sometimes that's what we do is we actually destroy the potential of the growth from our urgency and want to see it happen right now.
And impatience. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Meg.
Very, very thorough metaphor.
Love the metaphor. It's so accurate. Yeah. Thank you for the juicy conversation.
Anything else you wanted to get into?
I think it's round, full circle. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for staying tuned and for listening to the show. I know how busy you are, and I appreciate that you're sharing your two most valuable resources with me and my guest, your time and your attention. If you're looking for more conversation with other facilitators and for a community of practice, why don't you join Never Done Before, the community that I have built, and many of my podcast guests are already members. Visit neverdonebefore.org, and I wish to see you there.